To address any questions you have about data mining and predictive analytics, you can consider this our free consulting segment of the webinar, Open Access to the Modeling Agency's Advanced Analytic Gurus, Senior Consultants Keith McCormick and Scott Terry. Now, each question you submit, like I say, it'll receive multiple perspectives. We have a few great questions coming in now, and we've got a solid 15 minutes left, so there's still room for a number more. So just enter your questions into that question field of the webinar panel, and I'll be pleased to read them aloud for myself, Scott, and Keith to respond. So let's start with a question from Ruth. Let me push this out to Scott first, and then we'll go to Keith. Ruth asks, would you recommend learning R or Python?
First of all, I put myself on mute. Can you hear me okay now?
Coming through clear. Thanks, Scott.
Okay, super. Well, that's an excellent question. It gets asked a whole lot. I would say that both tools are really good. Both tools are leaders. Both tools are extremely capable, and both tools are free. So either one of them is a good tool. When I make a distinction between the two, I ask the question of, is there something else I want to do besides analytics? When you look at both tools from that perspective, R is probably not as capable as Python, because Python actually is a higher level coding language that can provide other types of benefits. For example, if your analytics are going to be implemented in a production perspective, then R can give you some capabilities, as well as whole multitudes of things that even include web coding. But the bottom line is it's really not the tool that's most important. It's the analyst who uses the tool.
That's great advice. Thanks so much, Scott. Keith, what would you like to extend?
Oh, I agree, of course, with everything that Scott said. The thing that I would add that I think is interesting is Katie Nuggets did their big, the website katienuggets.com did their poll just 3 or 4 months ago. And one of the things that's interesting about R is that almost 40% or something like that said that they used R, which was one of the larger numbers, but only 1.4% said they used R at the exclusion of other tools. So I guess the main caution would be, if learning R or Python is part of the journey, that's fine, but you may not find that it's one-stop shopping. It's not like from mastering that alone that your journey is over.
That's good advice as well. And I think with tools overall, there's a lot of organizations who, of course, we understand that they asked that question early. With so many other IT projects, you get your data together, you put a tool to it that you find maybe from the last vendor who presented to you, put them together and you solve the problem, and you get your value and go on. But as we've demonstrated in this webinar, that's just not the case with analytics, particularly with larger organizations. There's a lot more involved. So we often suggest that you not even consider a specific tool even on your first pass through a project development, because when you go through the assessment, there's so much that you're going to learn about your environment, about the experience of your team, about your overall situation, the way in which leadership wants to receive the results and the measurement, and ways in which it needs to be deployed, and any requirements for real-time analysis. And those things can really shape the selection of your tool. So the question may be, well, how do we develop our model in the first? Well, there's plenty of very capable open source software that will allow us to build a more than adequate prototype while we learn the overall requirements for the software and be able to document them so that you make a right-sized choice. You don't over-purchase, you don't under-purchase, have a package that is far more expensive and lacking capabilities that you didn't understand at the beginning, combining with what you already have in-house. We're vendor neutral, but Tony Rathburn always had a saying that as much as we're vendor neutral, we do have a favorite tool, and that's the one or the ones you already have in-house. We've got to take that into consideration as well. So that's another thing to put in your pocket as far as how to approach. Before I go on to the next question, in case I kicked anything up, wanted to give Keith or Scott in addition, another chance to respond in case I sparked anything from either of you two, or let me know if I should go on to the next.
I'm fine.
Okay. All right. Let's see. Give me a moment. I'm going to read over a few questions here to see if I can cluster any. Okay, let's go on to a question from Christian. Are there known metrics to estimate the effort to develop and deploy a set of analytics to an end user? Well, I think when it goes to an end user, we want to make sure it's going to be deployable and ultimately, have impact. So we would consider that, a full end-to-end model development deployment. So Keith, I think we'll go first with you this time. I know you have a series of slides where you talk about the typical modeling process development cycle, and I'm going to do my best to refrain. I always get greedy with these questions. Then go to Scott, and I think I might have a capper here at the end. So Keith, what would you say are the known metrics to estimate the effort to develop and deploy a set of analytics to an end user? And there's certainly different roles involved for a well-rounded team, and I know you've got a great series of slides in the project planning course that pertain to this.
Do we think, Eric, that that the question is around scale of effort, like how long the project will take, or model effectiveness?
Well, Christian uses the word effort, so I guess that would mean both. Sounds more like time frame to me.
Well, gosh, it's tough, right? Because every project is different, as you know. So
right.
This one's a little bit of a tough one, but I can say that probably 80–90% or more of the projects that I've been on range between 6 and 20 weeks. So you're not really going to find many in the 1 or 2 week range, and you're not going to find generally a whole lot of them that will go beyond 4 to 6 months. But of course, I think the most important thing, and I think this is probably what you're referring to, Eric, when you've seen me present content around this, is this whole notion that data prep takes the majority of that time. And I think sometimes people either are, I don't think they're surprised by it because everybody hears it so often, but they may sometimes think that, gosh, maybe it doesn't apply to us because our data is clean. But one of the really big things to realize is that data prep isn't about cleaning data. It's about massaging the data for the specific purpose of building a single predictive model. So it's highly customized. And so, for instance, creating new variables, what's called data construction, is a key factor in that. And that ends up taking, almost everyone agrees, more than half the time, and some folks will tell you it takes as much as 70 or 80% of the scale of the effort.
Big consideration, and that, certainly the breakout for the less sexy things around analytics does require the most time, and that's often where I make that analogy between candy and medicine. People want to get right to the candy and jump into the actual modeling software and see the machine learning take place and finding the patterns. But boy, if you don't take the time to take the medicine with the strategic planning and the assessing and the right preparation, as Scott was showing in his segment, you're going to pay for it downstream. We see it every time. Scott, how would you like to extend?
Well, that's a very good question from Christian, and boy, it sure would be nice if we could just have some formulas that we could plug in and get the answer. But that's not the way the real world works. To give you a one-word answer, the answer is no. That kind of stuff does not exist, as far as I know, or in my entire career. And the reason being is that he used the word analytics, and I think he's expanding it beyond just predictive analytics. Every analytical project that you do is going to have different requirements in terms of human resources, capital, and internal vendors, external vendors sometimes are involved. So even though there's not a formula that you could put input data to and get the answer, there is process that's involved that you can leverage on, and that process in simplest terms says, okay, let's lay out what we need, what we want to accomplish, figure out the steps that are going to be required to get us to our end goal, and come up with, in terms of, with some estimates in terms of time allocations and people allocations. And then when you get that number, add 20% to it, because something's going to blow up along the way. Somebody's going to drag their feet behind it, and start running down that path.
That's great advice, and yeah, we as consultants, we see those realities trickle in all the time, and not just from technical trip-ups or the like, but also different things that come down the stream from the organizations that we work with, reprioritizing and those kinds of things that we have to take into consideration and discuss and look at all implications and trade-offs. So I'll make one additional comment to Christian's question as I use this as a segue to a great question from Carlos, who asks how do we organize a new analytics area with different skills and coordination with other areas and direct reporting and to whom, et cetera. Carlos, I love that question. It's going to be hard for me to keep my response under, say, 3 hours. But let me start by wrapping up Christian's question, and it's going to evolve into yours, and I'll try to be as efficient as possible, and then yield to Scott and Keith for sum up. But with Christian's question, another consideration I'd like to offer up and look at a higher level is not just looking at a single project implementation, but like I was saying, the first one through should be starting to prototype more of a modeling factory within your organization. And you'll find ways in which you can roadmap your data preparation for common use with related modeling requests within your organization. And when you do a more comprehensive assessment, looking across departments, looking across the larger environment within larger organizations, interviewing more leaders around what is important for the organization to understand. And it's a two-way conversation, because many times they don't even know what to ask or what can be asked of analytics. And once they understand that, they can start to conceive what's important and start to develop trust in machine learning and predictive analytics that may not have existed previously. And when you start to look across at all these things, then you start to find that you can begin to build an internal analytic factory from start to finish, forming a more competent and well-rounded team with and understanding how the different functions work together. And when so coming back to wrap up Christian's question, when you're looking at time frame, as you start to build this more streamlined practice, which can be formed from that framework that we were presenting throughout the webinar, you take the parts of the framework that really applies to your organization situation, resources, objectives, makeup of the team, and the rest. Then future projects can be streamlined. So if the organization allows a little more time to establish a well-structured team and practice within the organization, then future benefits, just like building a factory, you now have your assembly lines that can also have multiple lines in it to do multiple, say, models, just like they did with vehicles, for different model types. You can start pushing those down the assembly line with a lot more confidence, with a lot more capability, and a lot more efficiency, so that what used to take 12 to 16 weeks now can take more in the order of 3 to 6, or even less, depending on how that whole factory is roadmapped. And that's what we like to guide organizations to develop. And so this is where I'll branch off to Scott and Keith with Carlos's question. Looking at the different skills to coordinate, direct reporting to whom, and even before the reporting, Carlos, is developing, like I was saying, some of those soft skills and leadership traits to be able to engage effectively with all the different roles that should be contributing to or benefiting from that modeling effort. They need to be coordinated in a way that we draw them all together to ultimately realize impactful results that are going to be adopted and can be made, to give residual benefit. So with that, additional thoughts. Let's start with Scott on how to organize an overall analytics practice or area, the different skills, reporting and the like? What advice would you have for Carlos?
That is an incredible question. That's a really good question.
That's a big one.
Yeah, that's a big one. That's a really big one. You can't give a pat answer in terms of who does it report to, because in our line of business, you may be a medical research facility, or you may be a business, in the public sector, and certainly the kind of reporting structures that would exist for a medical research facility would be different than they would be in a business. I worked more with businesses than I have with other industries, and typically, depending upon which segment you're in, which industry you're in within business, that reporting structure can vary. Most typically, you'll find that analysts report maybe up to marketing. They may report to finance. They may report to operations. And sometimes when you have a very large company, you may have a pool of talent that kind of floats out in space and has multiple lines of reporting to different brands within an organization. So you really have to look at it from the perspective of the organization itself. Now, as far as getting going, once you've made that decision, I think it would be a very big mistake to say, okay, here's everything we need, let's get a budget for it, let's hire, let's invest a lot of money in equipment and software before you've ever done anything. You're putting a lot of money and capital at risk because you have no experience at it. So I agree with the incremental prototyping type of approach. Let's start with something, and once we get some experience in terms of what the internal demand is, and we get some successes under our belt, then we will grow incrementally. So when you're first getting started, what do you need? Well, you need some hardware, you need some software, you need some data, and you need some talent in reverse order. The most important thing is to have talent. If you've got a great analyst, you can do a lot in Excel. We've already talked a little bit about open source software, so certainly that's something that you can capitalize on earlier, and if you need to at a later point get into commercial software, nothing wrong with it. But taking an incremental prototyping approach gives you the added benefit of being able to learn as you go without risking a lot in terms of money and capital investment. If you've got 6 months to a year's worth of experience in terms of an internal organization, you're going to be in much better shape to say what is it we really need than if you're trying to invest all that money up front with no experience whatsoever.
That's great advice. Thanks, Scott. And I should say there is a cheat sheet out there that offers the comprehensive list of strategic and tactical things to consider within that modeling practice framework. It's in the assessment, and it considers the assessment. This is where we wanted to grow that process model beyond the CRISP, cross-industry standard practice for data mining model, to look at more of the complex and strategic considerations that are available in larger organizations. So, and it is a framework. Not all things apply to all organizations. So it understands that these things are highly situational, but it's got the comprehensive checklist to look at everything from the organization's culture to the makeup of the team, the mindset of leadership, and how we're going to change mindsets to move from gut-level decisioning to data-driven, how teams across the organization are going to collaborate, the complex environments involved for where the resources are drawn, how we're going to make sure that we lead with goal-driven analytics as opposed to finding some interesting insights that at the end of the day don't align with organizational priorities, and then how we prioritize the projects that survive validation to be the ones that are going to be most meaningful to the organization, because you can come up with the best models or the best rocket to go out into space, but if you never worked on the mission plan and the team that's going to get that rocket in space and bring back whatever the mission objective is, then the mission's already failed. And that's what our focus is on, to advise our clients and what we impart in our training. Sorry if that was a little bit pitchy, but we've done the hard work out to ensure that our clients pull all of that together in a very coordinated way. Keith, I promised you last word, and I'm sorry again. I keep trying not to hog the mic here. I get too tempted, I suppose, but by all means, let me give you the last word for any other advice in putting together an ongoing analytic function like Carlos asked.
Well, it's a big topic, so it's tricky to do briefly. But the thought that I've had as I've been listening is that what I've been experiencing over the last several years, of course, is that analytics usually starts within the line of business, let's say marketing, right? Although it could be others, like the predictive maintenance is a big topic, or it could start within IT. But I think where most organizations are headed, they're not there now, but I think where they're headed and where we'll see this in 5 or 10 years is dedicated analytics management. And I think that's kind of the forgotten piece of this, is that we've gotten so caught up on the technical skills over the last few years, is that it takes a somewhat different kind of a skill to run that team. And again, companies don't have that yet, but they're moving towards that. 10 years ago we didn't talk about CAOs, but now we do. So I think that's an important direction.
That was a great capper, and perfectly condensed as well. But at 20 minutes short of going to 2 hours, and it's taboo even to schedule a webinar for 90 minutes and double taboo to go over it. We're always flattered by the incredible retention that we have, even though we plan far too much for a one-way webinar here. So grateful for our participants and the active participation and staying with us through to the end. We've got well more than half who started the webinar with us still here as we go overtime. But at 20 till the top of the hour and what would be the 2-hour mark, we better draw this event to a close. I'd certainly like to thank our attendees today for your sustained interest again and your active participation, as well as Scott and Keith for your great presentation segments and a very highly informative Q&A contributions. We'll follow up with an email shortly that'll have some resources and suggestions that'll hopefully be useful to you. And from there, we hope you've offered permission for us to stay in touch through the Modeling Agency's newsletter, and that you'll consider joining us at a public training event soon, whether in the classroom if you can, and if you can't, again, you'll really enjoy the connectivity that you'll have and the live engagement of our online training. So make sure to go to the website and check out the schedule and details for the October courses in Washington, D.C., or the upcoming live online productions that begin in November and run into December, certainly avoiding the holiday periods. Now, if you don't have a training budget or your schedule just doesn't fit, but you'd like the guidance of a seasoned mentor like Scott or Keith, you might be interested in the Modeling Agency's Escort on Call program. Escort on Call is essentially a retainer account that provides remote open access to a TMA senior consultant. Simply open up an Escort on Call account, and you've instantly added a wealth of experience and capability to your existing bench without expanding payroll, administrating complicated contracts, or taking elevated risk on larger commitments. We'll get you the answers you want, guide you through it tactically or strategically, and show you how it's done, implement any data mining tasks you may wish to delegate, and then remain on call until the next time you need us. And meanwhile, when we're not actively working, you're not paying a dime. So a link to the Escort on Call description page will be among the resources included in the follow-up email. On behalf of Scott, Keith, and myself, thank you again for attending Predictive Analytics Failure to Launch. Have a very pleasant afternoon and evening, and this brings the webinar broadcast to a close.